Hi, everyone. This is Jayne Rachael, and I am so excited to be here today with Dr. Eli Somer, who I know most of you know. He's a professor of clinical psychology out of the University of Haifa, and he actually discovered and coined the term maladaptive daydreaming. And I was really privileged to get to work with him on a few papers. So I want to start just a little bit about talking about like the early days of this research. I believe, Eli, that your paper was the first paper I've ever seen in my life about maladaptive daydreaming. And that was after looking for 20 years of researching psych databases. I came up with nothing until I found your article. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about what prompted you to write that very first article.
Sure. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in the outcome of trauma, specifically adverse childhood experiences such as child abuse and neglect. One of the outcomes of such circumstances is dissociation. That is the disconnection between different psychological functions, such as disconnecting memory from awareness, or the sense of presence and feeling detached from it, or even disconnecting from one's own identity and developing another identity. These are all psychological processes that initially serve as defense mechanisms and later can become, when used excessively or exclusively, a disorder. So that's my practice. That's what I do. And about 20 years ago, I noticed in my practice 6 different patients. I mean, that's what caught my attention, because it was that coincidence that 6 patients, a cohort simultaneously, talked about, some insinuated, some talked about a very rich inner life that they were sort of hesitant of bringing up. They weren't sure how related it is because to their other issues. They were all, of course, given my practice, survivors of childhood adversities.
Yep.
And when I started showing interest in their inner world, it seemed unique. And in its richness, in its vividness, and in its and how extensive it was. So I decided to write an extensive case report describing these 6 patients, and I was hesitant about what to call it, because it would have been too presumptuous to call it a daydreaming disorder or whatever, because there was nothing on the internet or in the literature about it. So I coined the now somewhat awkward term maladaptive daydreaming. So that's what brought me to publish the first paper, and it was published in a sort of class 2, not under the top-notch clinical journal. And by the way, received initially no response at all. So.
So I spent my whole life trying to find another maladaptive daydreamer, and I asked doctors, I looked in databases, found nothing. And then when I found your article, it didn't quite feel like me, because I didn't have that degree of childhood trauma. And I think if I remember, those 6 patients were, because maladaptive daydreaming is a spectrum. They seem to have very little life functioning, relationships. So I didn't quite see myself in it. But what struck me was the first time I ever saw the movement, which you term kinesthetic activity. Because when I was young, I would pace in circles and do my daydreaming, and I'd never seen that written before. So when I saw your article, I was like, wow. And then I don't know what I found first, but then I found this chat room on, it was like it was before Facebook and all of that. I found this chat room on India parenting site, and the article itself wasn't that interesting. It was just about a child who's, I think, mind drifted too much. But in the comment sections, there was comment after comment of people who said that they were addicted to these daydream worlds. They were spinning in circles. And I was like, I'd never seen anyone like that. And then I saw hundreds. And I don't know if you remember, but back then, I was trying to establish myself as a human rights attorney. So mental health was not as destigmatized as it was today. So I emailed you using a fake name. I think it was Suzanne, showing you that website. Does any of this ring a bell to you?
Well, you recently mentioned something like this, and I was so surprised. In fact, this is like I think you call it in English a light bulb memory, because I felt so excited receiving some sort of a feedback to this article, because the article was responding to with silence, just total disinterest. And I thought it's just, something rare that I came upon, or not something not real. So I remember your email very well, and I immediately went on this website and was surprised myself, of all places in India, which I shouldn't be surprised because they have a population of over 1 billion people. So, but a lot of the people writing there were from all over the world.
From all over the world. We both hear from people all over the world. Why do you think, you said the scientific community's reaction? To me, to have 6 patients in one practice showing, identical and unique symptoms is something that's really eye-opening. Why was the scientific community not that excited? Any thoughts about that?
Well, science likes to work in patterns, and to develop, and scientists like to develop lines of research in which they quote people they know and the theories they can relate to. So this was an anomaly, something sort of off-field, and apparently people couldn't relate to it. But the paper instigated some resistance as well. I remember being interviewed online somewhere, and they interviewed one of the most prominent daydreaming scholars, Klinger. It was Dr. Eric Klinger, which I highly respect, and he was very skeptical that something perhaps very normal is being pathologized. So this was the main concern: pathologizing something that is perhaps a little excessive, but is certainly within the boundaries of normality. But the evidence now shows that it is absolutely not normal, in the sense that it has distinct features that have nothing to do with regular mind wandering or daydreaming. The kinesthesia and the need for music are just examples, but I think the most striking evidence that this is not something healthy or normal is that it has a very high comorbidity with mental disorders. It is highly correlated with attention deficit. It is highly correlated with the OCD, anxiety disorders, and depression. So that cannot be, a mundane, normal mental activity.
Do you think it's its own disorder, or is it a symptom of all those disorders? So, for example, insomnia, which I suffer from, is like a disorder on its own, but it's also a part of depression and anxiety. So do you think it's a symptom that goes across many different disorders?
Well, let me tell you that some people with maladaptive daydreaming tell me that it's also related to maladaptive daydreaming, because some of them prefer to live in the fantasy and not stop it rather than sleep. So
yes.
To answer your question, the symptoms, the compulsion that people feel, the need, the sense of yearning that they have, and distress that they experience when they don't do it, indicates that this is it's not better explained by any other disorder. So it could be, if you look at, you could discuss now differential diagnosis. Why is it not OCD? Why is it not depression? Why is it? They are distinct enough these
Yeah.
disorders, and of course not 100% overlapping. So not all people with depression, for example, or with insomnia have maladaptive daydreaming. Not all people with maladaptive daydreaming or insomnia have maladaptive daydreaming. So
Yeah.
it's not overlapping at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
I want to go back a little bit to the scientific community's reaction, because interestingly, I forget the doctor's name, but it was not Klinger, but I went to a doctor at Yale when I was in law school who was a big daydreaming expert. And I just remember him being like, daydreaming can never, be a problem. It's always creative. And I could just tell though that he didn't understand what I was saying, right? He gave examples of someone who was a ballerina who imagine the choreography before bed. And I was like, no, that is, and I'm sort of mad at myself. I was in law school. I should have been more assertive, but at 20 something with this doctor telling me this doesn't exist, I wanted to be like, no, this is not that. This is hours and hours and hours at a time. And it's compulsive. But no one really understood that. And then when I went back to, I'm a lawyer, but I went back to psychology grad school, kind of a light bulb went on my head as to why I was never able to get help, because they don't like discovering something new because there's no scientifically validated tool yet, right? They don't like you going to internet sites because it's a self-selected sample. But at some point, right, when you have thousands and thousands of people on the internet saying the same thing, someone's got to be willing to take a look at that. So, I'm just so grateful to you, because you were the only person who was really willing to forge ahead and, kind of fight that criticism. Because I also heard from some, so what happened was, after I saw your article and I saw myself a little bit in it, but not completely, I went to my psychiatrist and had him write me up as a case study, but anonymously. And I also got the same feedback, like we should not be meditating creativity. But you touched on that this is very different. Like, in what ways have you seen it be maladaptive in people's lives? Just
in what way?
So yeah, when these doctors came at both of us and said you don't want to medicate creativity, I don't think they understand.
But it's not creativity, because we measured creativity, and it seems that while people with maladaptive daydreaming may have creative ideas in their fantasies, in real life they're not creative because they waste their life away in fantasy.
Yep. Exactly. I mean, and I think I told you a little bit beforehand that, I suffered this for 20 years, got completely better. But now I've had a little bit of an uptick during the pandemic. And what I'm noticing is I can concentrate on work, but when I'm trying to watch a TV show, these other thoughts keep coming to my head, and it's really frustrating. So people are very frustrated. So while this scientific community wasn't that responsive, what was I think we both got outpouring from people around the world. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, apparently after a while, people did what you have been doing. They continued to Google their symptoms in the desperate hope of finding out something out there. And these little articles got on Google and responded to these queries, to these keywords. So I started getting messages from people from all over the world that increased in its intensity and frequency, asking me questions about this and encouraging me to continue to do research. And after a short while, I discovered your work. And with Cynthia.
Yep.
And that was a very happy day for me, because you didn't call it maladaptive daydreaming, but it was obvious that we're talking about the same thing. So that's when I reached out to you, not knowing that you were Susan.
Yes, exactly.
Suggesting we collaborate. And from this, by the way, the first empirical studies on maladaptive daydreaming were born. So we were fortunate enough to take part in this important endeavor. And the maladaptive daydreaming scale was born out of our collaboration.